Sunday the 31st of August 2025, International Overdose Awareness Day. Welcome to my podcast, Peace Unplugged, the podcast dedicated to health and well-being. My name's Martin and I'm a retired drugs and alcohol counsellor with over 15 years' experience. And in recent years, I've been involved with promoting overdose awareness and ways to tackle this issue in today's modern society. I've worked with hundreds of clients over the years, and sadly some of those are lost along the way. Those people are never forgotten. So this is the time to remember those lost to overdose, and also to acknowledge the grief of the families of people that have lost family members. For me, International Overdose Day is a day to promote ways to significantly reduce the risks involved with substance use, drugs and alcohol. So let's start by looking back at the history of the use of drugs and alcohol. The history of drugs and alcohol use is actually as old as civilization itself. For instance, the use of opiates goes back to 8,000 years ago. This evidence is apparently found on some Sumerian clay tablets. Ancient Romans, Greeks and Egyptians all used opiates as a form of pain relief. At the time, it was seen as a cure-all for all pain and all ailments. It wasn't until the 19th that the isolation of morphine and the synthesis of heroin started to cause major problems. This has eventually led to the public health crisis that we've seen worldwide in recent years. Similarly, the use of alcohol also has a very long history. Evidence of this has been found back as far back as 7,000 years BC in China. In some cases, alcohol beverages were seen as safer than local water sources. Problems with alcohol use started to appear in the 18th century with the mass production of gin. Attempts to address this were tried in the USA with the introduction of prohibition, but that didn't last very long. It simply pushed it all underground and made things much worse. This history teaches us a fundamental lesson, that is that the relationship between human beings and drugs and alcohol is long and complicated and is ongoing and ever evolving. So what are the risks that lead to overdose? Overdose is not a random event. It's the combination of a series of risk factors. One of the most significant risks is mixing substances. For example, combining opioids and alcohol or benzodiazepines. These can dangerously depress the central nervous system, leading to respiratory failure. People who have recently gone through periods of abstinence, such as after leaving treatment program, are also extremely at high risk. Their tolerance to substance has decreased. I know this from personal experience, having worked with people, particularly when they are released from prison, having had virtually no drugs or alcohol in their system, and then suddenly set out into the environment where they suddenly start to try and use drugs how they used to when they had a high tolerance. So a relapse can very, very dangerously be fatal, and that's usually where the fatalities occur. The purity and content of illicit drugs are also a major risk. In recent years, the introduction of powerful synthetic opioids like fentanyl into the drug supply has led to catastrophic risk in overdose deaths. Certainly in recent years, new synthetic drugs that are evolving all the time keep on flooding the market, which makes them very difficult to detect. There's now a major argument that traditional prohibition techniques around drugs and alcohol simply don't work. What it actually needs is to be managed. Whilst abstinence for some can be life-changing and life-saving, it's not a one-size-fits-all. In fact, there's a larger percentage of people that need a different approach. The harm reduction model has a much broader approach. Similar language used is harm minimization. The modern world is now moving into some more radical approaches to this problem. During my career in community treatment services, I got heavily involved with the distribution of Naloxone, which is the overdose antidote. Naloxone, also known as Narcan, comes not only as intravenous treatment, but now comes along with the ability for it to be snorted. This helps to address the issue that some people have with their fear of needles. Some countries are now trialling the introduction of supervised consumption rooms for drugs, where medical professionals are able to observe people whilst they take the drugs that they have chosen to do so, but they're in the safest possible place. And that way there's less likely to involve overdose. And for a long time now, community services have been providing needle and syringe programs, exchange programs, which provides clean works for people. This prevents diseases like hepatitis C, hepatitis B, and HIV being spread. In my personal experience of working in drugs and alcohol, the risks of heroin use have dramatically reduced. In the last couple of years, I'd say that has happened. There's become less availability of the opioid poppy being available. But for 2025 and beyond, this has simply brought about more challenges with the introduction of other drugs, such as ketamine, which is now becoming much more prominent, along with other synthetic stimulants. The opioid crisis has become much worse through the introduction of synthetic opioids like nitazines. So how are drug treatment services proposing to address this continued problem? It appears now that the future of drug and alcohol treatment is moving away from one-size-fits-all treatment style to a much more holistic-based way of working with people. It's finally beginning to be recognised that substance use and mental health problems go along together very closely and need to be dealt with and treated in the... Whilst there has been a long history and a successful history of peer-led services like Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, they have not completely solved the problem. However, peer-led services are still seen as the way forward, and it's becoming clear that peer-led services don't necessarily have to be completely abstinence-based. So on this International Awareness Day of 2025, let's take some proper action to address the situation. Let's move away from the stigma of drug use and alcohol use. Treat people with a little bit more respect. It is a problem that can affect anybody. It's time to treat people with a little bit more dignity and compassion. And perhaps, more controversially, it's time to move away from the traditional methadone programs, which in my experience simply trap people in treatment and don't really make an awful lot of difference. I believe we need to move away from the controlled drug treatment services that have occurred in recent years. And of course, it remains to be seen what new innovations will come about in the future. The bottom line for me is, let's treat people with the compassion and dignity they deserve. Thank you.